Good morning. Winterview is back again with another brief dialogue for his dear friend, Annastacey. Once again, just a reminder, I'm driving along, sounds of the car in the background, sounds of screaming pedestrians, sounds of, well, me as well. This brief dialogue is on altered states of consciousness. Fascinating topic. Somehow it seems to overlap into the whole Enlightenment Non-duality thing. So, thought I'd spend a little time talking about it. Now stuck behind a truck going up a hill. I can hear chirping in my ears. I don't know why. I hope that's not a medical condition. Right, altered states. What is an altered state of consciousness? Let's start with the one that most people are familiar with, the one that we all seem to have pretty much every day or every night. That is the dream state. What is the dream state? Well, the way it works is this. For something to be altered, you need to have a sense of a baseline. The baseline, in this case, in most people's cases, case I, is the day, the waking reality in the day. That's what we commonly call reality or normal. But we don't often think about that as reality or normality. It's just a given. But actually, it's a very powerful belief that this waking daytime state is what we call normal reality. And once we've locked that in as a reference point, every departure, everything different from that is altered or unusual or different somehow. So it's the altered states are always in reference to the state we most commonly experience and the state we commonly most experience as normal. In the dream state, there's a few things that are, well, there's quite a lot of things that are different, but there's a few key changes that take place. The first thing is the content of a dream is usually unusual. It's it's everything from bizarre, never seen this before, to sometimes mundane. Here I am buying a litre of milk, or a pint of milk, depending where you live. And what's I find even funnier is when you're in the dream, you don't question it. It's just totally normal. There's a rhinoceros talking to me about the stock market in China. That is so normal for some reason in this dream. But if that happened in the waking state, you'd think you're losing your mind. You'd think you're going totally crazy. The other thing that's worth mentioning is the sense of time and space in the dream is completely different from the sense of time and space in our normal waking reality. The dream time is often it often jumps great tracts of time. Sometimes dreams are fleeting, just a few seconds, and sometimes they seem to stretch on interminably, so you can feel quite exhausted when you wake up, like you've been dreaming for days even. The geographic boundaries of the dream world are peculiar. You never quite know where you are, and it's never quite stated explicitly. And again, it jumps around. You can be out at sea, then suddenly you're back on land, and suddenly you're on top of a mountain, and suddenly you're underground. And again, it's all funny because it's never questioned. So one of the other features of the dream state is the critical, evaluative faculties of mind seem to be, taking a nap, or they're not there at all for some reason. In the daytime, in the waking, so-called real waking state, there are altered states that we go in and out of during the day. Little, what I call mini trances, or mini or micro dissociations. Now, dissociative states in psychology or psychiatry have a particular meaning, and are commonly associated with something negative, in that if you've had a traumatic event, you might tend to dissociate from it. And the models around dissociation they're quite varied, so I'll just give you a very bread and butter definition. You literally zone out so you can supposedly avoid the pain. And it's like when you see someone wake up in the morning, they're not quite in the world yet, they're still sort of a bit foggy, and they get that 1,000-yard stare. They just stare off into the distance as if they're looking at something incredibly important or thinking about something incredibly important, and they're usually not. They're usually just, they've gone, so to speak. And you call their name and they sort of snap back to reality. Oh, sorry, what were you saying? That's an altered state of consciousness right there. If you read a book and sit quietly, you enter an altered state of consciousness in a way. Your brainwave frequencies change. The sense of time and space begin to change too, and so on. And so there's a kind of a theme there, in that the space-time, the sense of space-time changes, alters. The one thing that doesn't seem to change, no matter what the state, though, is the sense of existence itself. The sense that you're there to experience the state, which is often overlooked when we talk about altered states. That sense of being there for it is fundamental. How, obviously, would you know you're in an altered state if you weren't there for it? There are altered states of consciousness associated with drugs and alcohol, mind-altering substances as they're known. Alcohol is a very common one, obviously. Everyone, at least every adult, probably has had the experience of that altered state at least once. Some of it unpleasant, some of them quite pleasant. The altered state with alcohol, once again, the critical evaluative parts of the brain seem to park for a while and go offline. And when they're offline, it's like, great, we can play now. You know, the self-consciousness, sense of self-consciousness drops away. There's another clue about waking conscious, where in the sober state, you might say, there's a more critical evaluative component of mind and a self-conscious component in play at the same time. Self-consciousness is often talked about in Enlightenment and Non-duality, so I guess I need to be a bit more specific about what that means. Self-consciousness in psychology, we often talk about it with people who suffer from social anxiety disorders, because their sense of self-consciousness seems to be maladaptive or very, very unhelpful. They go to parties, or actually they don't go, but if they did go to a party, they'd be extremely tuned in to their imaginings of what other people must be thinking about them, or they're definitely looking at me and thinking stuff. And so there's a sort of strange jumping out of oneself, imagining the point of view of the other, imagining that they're judging you, and of course it's negative judgment. So they feel intensely uncomfortable in social situations. So that faculty that does that when you get drunk seems to shut down, and that person who has social anxiety often loosens up, becomes more relaxed. And social anxiety and alcohol go hand in hand, often with adults, and can become very problematic if that's your coping strategy, you might say. But what's going on for most of us in our normal waking daytime state, and when we're not drunk, I might add, is some sense of self-consciousness. Most people have it to some degree. Might not be clinically a problem, but there's a vague sense even of, what do others think of me right now? So that's a little imagining that goes on in normal waking consciousness. The critical evaluative part of mind is also there too. There's little voices that you hear in your head like, oh, silly me, oh, I shouldn't have done that, oh, why did I do that? All that goes on for most people most of the time in their mind, and usually it's not a clinical problem. But what happens, this is now kind of going the opposite way to alcohol, what happens when you speed up the so-called normal processes that go on? So for example, that critical evaluative voice that most of us have and it babbles away in the background most of the day, what happens when you ramp that up to a severe degree so it's now almost seems like it's yelling in your ear all day, all night, and the things that it's saying are incredibly harsh, like go kill yourself, go, you're worthless, you're useless, very, very harsh language and incessant and ongoing. That too indicates an altered state of consciousness to some degree. There's a difference between what I would call the normal waking state and that state. And then there's the intense self-consciousness that could be online, ramped up like social anxiety. Or you could get a very interesting problem where the self-consciousness goes away completely without alcohol, so the person becomes disinhibited, they do whatever, yet they've got the very critical, hyper-analytical voice screaming at them, and now you start to see something that looks a lot like psychosis. And psychosis, again, is definitely an altered state of consciousness for the individual experiencing psychosis. And thrown in the mix there, most of us have beliefs that we're vaguely aware of during the day, but in psychosis, these belief systems sometimes become ramped up so that they're prominent and peculiar. A belief that, say, the television is talking directly to me. It's a personal message. A feeling that I'm being followed or stalked, and I feel like I'm catching people out the corner of my eye watching me. That sense as well. And once you enter that type of domain, then of course you get anxiety creeping in, or not even creeping in, racing in. In psychosis, people get extremely anxious, and the autonomic and nervous system is working overtime. They can get very angry suddenly at little things they perceived were done to them just suddenly, and so that's another altered state. So the emotions as well change the shades of reality. So what I'm saying, I guess, is that every little thing that alters the state that we call normal waking reality is an altered state of consciousness. For those of you who've meditated or done some trancing out kind of work, or perhaps have even taken hallucinogenics in the context of spiritual growth, might also have a very powerful sense of the difference between normal waking consciousness and altered states of consciousness. The meditative state is one that's very easy for most people to access, and with a little bit of practice, barely any practice really, you can find yourself in a profoundly different state to your daytime normal waking state of consciousness. When you meditate, typically the breathing slows down, the thought processes at first they may speed up, but then they slow down too. And then there can be a state of detachment from the thoughts. It feels like you've stepped back from the thoughts. You're just watching the thoughts happen in a way without any critical evaluation. And there's another nod to the old critical evaluative part of the mind. It somehow can be distanced, or not quite switched off, but ignored for a while. In these meditative states, though, other things have been said to happen, like with time, a sense of time slowing down, a losing the sense of time as well. So there again is the reference to differences in space and time. But most people who are listening to this in the context of enlightenment or liberation might be wondering, what does it mean for liberation? Does an altered state point towards liberation, or vice versa? Is liberation an altered state, perhaps? And this is a very popular belief. It still has a very strong flavour in some quarters. It's a very strong allure in some quarters, that I somehow need to alter my state of consciousness in some way to be liberated, or I'll know when I'm liberated when my state of consciousness is markedly different. It's a fair thought in a way. It's like a logical thought. We hear that when there's liberation, this is a story of course, that there is somehow a loss of the sense of self. And indeed there can be very powerful experiences of the dropping or loss of the sense of identity, which are experienced as altered states. Time and space seem to stand still suddenly, or the quality of the objects in the appearance suddenly changes without the sense of reference to the object. There's a sudden sense of everythingness. But the clue that it's, well, I don't want to be like a party pooper, but I'm going to sound like a party pooper. In a way, it's no big deal. It doesn't mean anything. It's yet another experience passing through the awakeness itself, that alive, aware awakeness itself. The remembering or hearkening back to an earlier dialogue where I said the contents of the awakeness do not impact on the awakeness itself. The awakeness itself is a priori. It is unchanging. It is seamless. The awakeness itself doesn't have qualities, objective qualities. So when a state changes, it never impacts on the awakeness itself. And that should be a clue that states of consciousness, however fascinating the experience or however compelling or beguiling they are in some ways a distraction, a red herring in a way. They seem somehow profoundly spiritual, and they fall very neatly in line with spiritual beliefs that the seeker might have who is seeking enlightenment. They might be meditating because they've heard that that's what you need to do to become enlightened. And while they meditate, they might have incredible experiences of altered states. They might really trance out, zone out, loss of sense of self, loss of sense of time and space, a feeling of being everywhere all at once, etc. and so forth. And all the while, as this is going on, the mind is delighting because it seems that because I'm having these altered states, something's happening. I'm on my way to enlightenment. This is it, And after a particularly profound meditative experience, the mind might be really satisfied, like, wow, I'm really getting somewhere. That was an incredible experience. And they're often shared with others who are meditating, like, wow, when I meditated last night, I became God, I merged with one, and all this sort of great stuff, and it really feels like you're on your way. But unfortunately, it's a bit of a red herring. It's meaningless. It's like looking at the clouds passing in the sky, and when you see a particularly interesting cloud, you go, wow, did you see that cloud? It looked like Jesus. That I must be really getting there. I'm on my way. That cloud just said it looked like an angel. That's meaningful. And so there goes the mind again, imbuing some meaning onto the images that are experienced in consciousness or in awareness, imbuing power into the story where it doesn't exist. So these altered states of consciousness, as weird and as wonderful as they might be, are, at the end of the day, clouds in the sky, clouds passing in the sky. Enlightenment and liberation doesn't have a quality. There's no quality that you can point to and say, it feels like this. It feels like this, because again, it's looking at it the wrong way around. Looking at the experience and going, enlightenment is an experience, is the thinking that I'm going to experience. It's going to happen. And there's the clue there. It's going to happen. It is something is going to future happen, an event. And of course, to me, it's going to happen to me. I hope. That's the big hope. So the experience, if you want to call it an experience, of enlightenment is, and this is the very disappointing part, it's super normal, you could say. It's back to normal again. Like, no, I wanted it to be special. It's not special at all. The specialness is derived from something that cannot be described. The specialness is in a way, the revelation of the mystery behind it, if you could say. But that's not necessarily apparent. That's a hard one to describe, or it's indescribable, which is annoying. There can be, I would say that there can be changes to the character. There could be some differences to the person. The critical evaluative stuff might fall away a little bit. There can be little shifts in the sense of space-time and all that, but it's all a red herring. It doesn't really matter. It's just clouds in the sky. But I guess what happens is the mind tends to look at the changes in the content and then wants to emulate whatever changes it sees. So if someone was to report, yeah, I'm enlightened, and now I'm really peaceful, and I love everyone, the mind will automatically pick that up and go, right, what I've got to do is be really peaceful and love everyone. Or someone might say, yeah, I heard about enlightenment, or I got enlightened, and now I have this sense of stillness that's eternal and all-powerful, and is ever unchanging, and so on. And it's an eternity feeling, and pointing to an altered state. And now the mind goes, okay, now I have to get that altered state. If I don't have that altered state, it can't be enlightenment, and it starts making up rules about it. If altered states were the way forward, let's just say hypothetically, then we'd be doing stuff to achieve enlightenment. We'd be meditating, we'd be drinking alcohol perhaps, we'd be taking mind-altering substances of varying degrees, and the thoughts would be that this will somehow get rid of the self, or impact on the self, or expand consciousness somehow, as if that was a thing that could happen. Or a shift in perception is what's needed. I need to really shift my perception through these altered states of consciousness. The altered states of consciousness can be marvelous. They can be incredible experiences, and I've certainly had a few myself that if I was to tell you what happened, you wouldn't believe it. They're unbelievable. The experiences are actually unbelievable, but they're like a roller coaster or a sideshow at a fair. Just wonderful, I guess, experiences, but at the end of the day, so what? Anyway, I think it's coffee time. This is enough brief dialoguing for now. I hope you enjoyed this talk. Throat's getting a bit dry. This has been Winterview. Comments are welcome.